Carter, the hardest thing about being human is dealing with other humans. You know, if you've ever thought about the fact that every other species on the planet sort of has a rhythm and a routine of how it deals with one another, nature just rules. The survival of the fittest is the rule of the jungle, but with humans, it's very, very different. At least we expect it to be different. Early on in human existence, people figured out that it was hard to deal with one another. There had to be some kind of rules of engagement, rules of what was appropriate. And so about 1700 BC, there was this guy named Hammurabi who came up with this code, and the code was basically whatever somebody does to you, you can do back to them. This is where you get the idea of an eye for an eye, and it was the basis of a lot of the law, even in the Old Testament. But then something happened. As time went on, people began to say, that's not the best way to do this. Just the disincentive not to hurt other people wasn't quite good enough. And so teachers like Confucius came along and said something like, don't do to other people what you don't want them to do to you. Well, again, this was sort of a survival of the fittest kind of rule until a teacher named Jesus came along, and he came up with a much better rule. And that rule was, do to others what you would want them to do for you. In other words, don't just avoid having conflicts with people, but in fact, go out of your way to engage people and help them in ways that you would want to be helped if you were in their position. Jesus said, this sums up all the law and the prophets. Just think about that. All the history of the law, everything the prophets had said can be summarized in this simple rule. It has become so popular that even secular society recognizes it as the golden rule. But it was revolutionary for its time. As Jesus was teaching us the best way to be human, he was offering us an insight of how we can treat each other in a way that dignifies and helps those who are helpless. You see, just to avoid doing to other people what you don't want them to do to you means that anybody who's hurting, anybody who's abused, neglected, forgotten, anybody who's been left out, anybody who's a victim or has suffered devastation, well, they're just left on their own. But Jesus' rule, the golden rule, do to others what you would have them to do for you, lifts the bar on all of us. Listen to this passage found in Luke chapter 6, beginning in verse 27. Here's how Jesus sets it up. But I say to you who hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. To one who strikes you on the right cheek, offer the other also. And from the one who takes away your cloak, do not withhold your tunic. Give to everyone who begs from you, and from one who takes away your goods, do not demand them back. And as you wish that others would do to you, do so to them. When people heard this, their minds were exploding. This was so revolutionary. But then Jesus goes on even further. He says this, if you love those who love you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. In other words, just to love people who are going to love you back is just transactional. That's just the way the world regularly works. And he goes on and says, if you do good to those who do good to you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. And if you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to get back that same amount. But love your enemies and do good and lend, expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High, for he is kind to the ungrateful and the evil. Be merciful, even as your Father is merciful. This is an amazing teaching, and it can really be summarized in just a few words. Love is as love does. Love is as love does. In other words, the way you want to receive love, the way you want people to treat you, is the way you should treat and love other people. And yeah, there are times where you might not get it in return, but Jesus' word is to continue to do those things is what sets us apart from the rest of the human race. It sets us apart, and people see in us what they want to see in God, what they expect from God. And so we become lights to the world as we just simply love other people the way we expect them to love us. In fact, when asked the greatest commandment, Jesus said this. It's two things. It's pretty simple. Love God and love others. But the problem is you can't separate those things. You can't love God if you don't love other people. And so in order to love God, we love each other. We even love the unlovable, people who can't pay us back, people who can't do for us what we would do for them. But instead, we see that our loving them is an exchange for the love that God has freely given us in Jesus Christ. See, Jesus didn't just say these things, but he ultimately demonstrated it as he went to the cross and he died a death, giving up his life for us. That God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. The Bible says even while we were still sinners, in other words, when we were enemies of God, Christ died for us. He loved us. He did to us what he wants us to do to each other. So this week, as you go about your week, in your relationships with people in your family, people in the neighborhood, people in your workplace, just remember this: love is as love does. The way you want them to treat you is the way you should treat them. And if you're wondering, well, who goes first? The answer is you do, according to Jesus. That you love them even when they're being unlovely, because that's what Jesus has done for you. Grace and peace be with you.